one of the things that we have noticed, those of us that pay attention, is with the incredible success of the Hope Fest, which introduced the kingdom in a very powerful way into the unreached community God planted us among here, is it was just an incredibly anointed thing that reached much more than most of you can begin to understand. The great impact it had on this community. And prior to the fest, the area was controlled by one group of people, and then there was a power struggle that another group of people came in and took it all from the dark side. We don't need to talk about that. But what has happened is that was in the heart of Pride Park. That was the heart. That was the center of everything that goes on in the park, which runs from 63rd to 53rd. It's a rectangle, 9th Street up to anyway. And what we have seen is now is the pushback. Because ever since that happened, we've been doing follow-up, and it's been happening. This is the first Saturday. There's no one in the office over here doing follow-up on that, contacting people. And we're going to go back out and push into that community, and a lot of groundwork went into that. But those of us who are sensitive feel the repercussions of that. It's warfare. It's open warfare. And that's what I'm talking about today, kingdom warfare. The kingdom is a kingdom of war. Yeshua talked about that throughout his whole ministry 21 centuries ago when he walked among us, and he talked about, division within the very home. And if you don't think there's a war going on, that means you're losing. A lot of people don't believe in warfare, and a lot of people have strange theologies around warfare. But Yeshua taught and ministered in the realm of the kingdom and the warfare of the kingdom. And he introduced it openly in the course of his teachings, in the course of his discussions, in the course of his allegories. He talked quite extensively about the warfare of the kingdom. And then a realm of the unpardonable sin and the exchanges that took place over that particular incident, he was talking about the warfare within the kingdom. Because remember, he cast a demon out of a mute, which is a messianic sign. And there was a lot of pushback by the religious. And in Mark 3:24, he gives an allegorical picture of their problem with their theology. Because he said, the Sanhedrin said, you're casting out demons by the power of the chief demon. Okay? That's a religious statement. And he said, if a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. That's just a real simple thought. Any kingdom that is divided against itself is not going to last. No kingdom can survive if it's divided against itself. And he goes on with a step further to that in the next verse, where he says in verse 25, and if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. There's an absolute requirement of unity. The kingdom is about unity. The kingdom is about unity no matter whose kingdom you are a part of. If the kingdom of a nation is divided against itself, that foretells doom. There's no hope. If a house, a step up from that would be a congregation, a step up from that, a kingdom center. If a house is divided itself, it will not be able to stand. Nothing can stand that is not in unity. No movement, no nation, no family group can stay together if it's divided against itself. Some of you have families that are divided. As a matter of fact, most families are divided. Those of you who knew the Ringlings in the tenure with us here, they understood. They were running a circus. They ran actually two circuses. Charlie had one, and one of his brothers had the other one. They had to get out of the circus business because they saw the demise of the family. They saw the demise of the American family. There weren't going to be stable families. There were going to be single-parent families, and the reality is a single-parent family can't afford to go to the circus. And it was a business decision. Let's get out of the business. You can't have a circus without families. Everything falls apart. Without unity, there is a real problem because there's war. If you have warfare in any instance, it brings destabilization, and he brings up they called him Baal Zebub. Baal is a demon. Zebub, a fly, the Lord of flies. It's a very high-ranking demon. He brings up the king of the other kingdom in the next verse. And says in verse 20, if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but his end has come. Satan means accuser. Accuser. He's called Satan, which doesn't mean anything, but Satan is Hebrew. Ha-Satan, the accuser, a Satan, accuser. If the accuser is divided against himself, his end has come. That's it. You think it's difficult to live by the rules of God's kingdom. I'm seeing, and maybe you did come from the dark side. We've had some high-level satanic people come to the Lord here. That is a powerful kingdom, but boy, you better do it right. Because what you're doing, and just, I don't know why I'm saying this. On the dark side of the satanic kingdom, if you're going to cast a spell, what you're doing is ordering a demon to go do something. Okay? If you mess up in ordering a demon to go do something, that demon's liable to turn on you. That's what a spell is. You know, a seance is necromancy, contacting the dead, which is contacting demons. All these things that do, well, you better do it right because you're opening the door to all kind of things. Because even, it's that, you know, a demon cast out a demon. Well, if the demons are casting out demons, there's no future to that kingdom. And it's Satan's kingdom, and his kingdom is dividing itself. Its end has come. There's no hope for anything that is divided, which doesn't foretell a bright future for this country, in my opinion. I think we are a divided country. And he then gives an interesting concept, but it has to do with the fact that he's casting out demons. Okay? In the next verse, he says, no one can enter a strong man's house to ransack his property unless he first ties up the strong man, then he will thoroughly plunder his house. This is talking about warfare. He cast the demon out of a deaf mute. And it was taught in that point in history, only Messiah can cast demon out of a deaf mute. Because the priest casts demons out by saying, what is your name? And which is what he did to the Gadarenes, remember? What is your name? When he finds a name, you command him out by name. Some Christianity teaches that. There's a biblical basis for that. There's nothing wrong with that. But if somebody can't talk, you can't find out their name. So only Messiah can do that, was the thought. And he says, here's how it works. A strong man can go into a man's house, but he can't ransack it unless he ties up the strong man. There's a lot of warfare going on here. This has something to do. You know, to reach an unreached community. And we could not have done the Hope Fest without help from Christianity. Never would have happened with just this congregation. and you need to know that if some of the Christian community did not, and what they did is they did a foreign outreach into Pride Park. And to them, it was a mission field, which it is to them. And they just based here because we are in Pride Park. But it was absolute warfare. And a lot of things had to happen. And they even gave us credit from the main stage. They said there's a local ministry that has been praying through this area for more than a year. And this festival is a direct result of that. Why? Because we went in and changed the spiritual atmosphere. We were tying up the strong man. We were tying up strong. Didn't seem like we were doing much during that season. That was largely happened before COVID. And then after COVID, we changed what we were doing. We stopped going door to door and just went through the neighborhood praying. And the people who ran the fest, particularly Renan, who is the center of what everything happened there, Renan knew that this congregation had been doing this. And he knew that festival was just, why? We were going in tying up the strong man. Didn't seem like much. But then God, in his sovereignty and mercy, made it very clear that we, as a kingdom center, have to have the wherewithal to be willing to go arm in arm and hand with Christianity, who wants to do something kingdom-oriented, and work together to ransack the house, which is what we did. Hundreds of salvation, mostly men. Mostly men receive the altar. But you have to understand that. In Ephesians, and I'm not going to get into the armor of God because it's a lot more complex than people think. And I don't want to teach that as part of this teaching, but it's in that realm of the armor of God, which is not a formula. It's instructions. Just accept that. Ephesians 6:12. Here's the problem we have. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against powers, against the worldly forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in heavenly places. And see, there's a struggle that goes on outside of these walls. In particular, we are called to go out and take part in the struggle. The struggle is not against the people. Anyone that was at the fest and talked to the people, and we had people in every realm of ministry. Most of the registration went through our people. Most of the after the altar call, salvation call, anyone who wanted to give more information, it was our people. They wanted to register to get all their bills paid. It was from our congregation. Anything they wanted to do. I was in charge of a lot of areas, and I grabbed people and I put them in charge of things like parking and this and that. We were heavily engaged, and we were struggling, but our struggling was against flesh and blood. The people were through it. It was cold. It was cold. The wind was blowing. It was one of those colds. It was cold. It was miserable. But I tell you, when you have hundreds of men come forward and say, we want what you're talking about. We want hope in our life. It was not presented as Christianity. Nothing had to do with Christianity. It was about hope, presenting the kingdom to the people. And there was nothing Christian about it. A lot of Christians involved, but they didn't like, it's not, and that's why they couldn't make it about one church or another church. But all the Christians were happy because it was founded out of a synagogue, and they don't know who we are. So they're not in competition with a synagogue. What do they know about a synagogue? So it's a nice place to base out of. And if we were just a church, they couldn't come here because they would come to build our church. But God made all the adjustments necessary. We're a Messianic synagogue. We're biblically, I have a new concept. We're biblically Messianic. We're not Messianic. We're biblically Messianic. That kind of defines who we are. See, we're a safe place. And they know that while we're in there having a service, they could sit in there and do follow-up on the festival. As a matter of fact, they were scheduled to be there 3 or 4 more weeks, and they emailed me or texted me and say, we actually got all the work done. We're not going to be using your building. I said, well, if you ever want to use it, it's there. Knock yourselves out. You can do it. But the struggle is against the worldly forces of darkness. It's not flesh and blood. There is a demonic darkness against spiritual forces of wickedness in heavenly places. And I'm going to get in that a little bit more depth a little bit later on this message. I want you to think about that. It's against spiritual forces of wickedness in heavenly places. It's not the people. As I told people, when the gang was replaced by the cartel, it's the same people. That doesn't change us. We're going to go after the people. Who cares who thinks they're in charge? We're going to take the kingdom of God. It doesn't change much. In Corinthians, in 2 Corinthians, which again is a worldly congregation that got saved, came out of the world but had a world in them, and 1 Corinthians had to kind of straighten that out. 2 Corinthians, they got it together. And then he's explaining what now you have your act together. Here's what you're doing. What you're doing is warfare. Though we walk in the flesh, we do not wage war according to the flesh. It's the terminology that everybody understood at the planting of Messiah's kingdom after his first coming. It's a kingdom of war. We walk in the flesh, we don't wage war, which presumes you're waging war. This is a Greek letter, so it's going to be analytical, not allegorical. Greeks and Romans don't think allegorically. They think analytically. And so we're at war. We're walking in the flesh. We're not don't war according to the flesh. Next verse 4. The weapons of our warfare are not fleshly, but powerful through God for the tearing down of strongholds. We're tearing down false arguments. See, there's the war. We are tearing down false arguments. This comes from the heavenly places. It's an argument. It's not people. It's not flesh and blood. Verse 5, the next verse. And every high-minded thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Messiah. Every thought captive to the obedience of Messiah. I said, right after this service, after the meeting I have with people and become members, I'm running out to Beit Yeshua. Beit Yeshua is at DeSoto Correctional Institute. It's just the reality of the state prison system. Most of the people in the congregation have multiple life sentences. Multiple life sentences. Up to 10 consecutive life sentences. We had one elder who only had one. He only had one life sentence. He's considered a lightweight. Eddie Cohen. Eddie was still there, by the way. And then now we're actually going to lose another one because he changed the guy. Eddie was one of the elders, and he got arrested. And most of them, he's like most. And when he was 19, lost his temper and killed somebody. And he's never going to get out. But he heard there was no leaders for the Messianic community of Orlando Correction Institute. He put in a request to be transferred, to be trained, and then end up in Orlando so he could start a Messianic congregation there. These guys are fiery evangelists. And we deal with those issues of one of the guys has 10 consecutive life sentences. One of my elders was an Orthodox Jew who has 4 consecutive life sentences. And here's the reality. It's a big issue dealing with homosexuality in a system where you go in when you're 19 and that's the last time you're ever going to see a woman. And all of us involved, I'm involved, Larry will be there last week, Bob was there last week, I'm going today. There's only 3 of us now because we don't have enough help. We have to deal with that reality. We have to confront that. The state law cracks down on that like it's one of their big focuses. That is unacceptable practice. If we find out something happened in that realm, we are liable if we don't report it. They really, really crack down because it's a big issue. And I've had to deal with it. And God is with us because I've never had to deal with that too much out here in a normal congregation. But there, it's a regular thing. One of the guys had a homosexual encounter, and they wanted to disfellowship him. And we show up, as we do every Shabbat, and they say, we want to disfellowship this guy. We told him not to come today because we want him disfellowshipped. And I said, why? Well, he had a issue. And I had just one of those spiritual things that said, okay, whoever's without sin, cast the first stone. You know, you've massacred who knows how many people to get 10 consecutive same sentence, but this guy. And they said, and you have to understand, this is just God. I don't think about these things. Here's something you need to know because you need to know how to minister these things. People say, I'm a homosexual, I'm a lesbian, I'm this, I'm that. And I said, that's not true. There is no homosexuals, there is no lesbian. Because the Bible says, I created them men and women. And I don't care what anyone else says, you're either a man or you're a woman. What if I'm drawn to another man? What if I'm drawn to another woman? What if I'm drawn to anything? Well, I could be drawn to anything. I better take every thought captive. You see? Because I could lean towards doing an immoral act with anything other than my spouse. I got to take that thought captive. If I don't, I do something, but I wasn't made that way. That's rebellion. It's rebellion. And if that causes us problems, that's too bad because that's the Bible. You see, there's men and there's women. God said, I didn't make men and women and homosexuals and lesbians and all these initials that exist nowadays. He didn't make anyone that way. What if I'm drawn to that? You know, some people are drawn to alcohol. And a lot of people are drawn to alcohol can become alcoholics. They weren't made that way. They're just drawn to that. And I love you all because I struggle with weight like anybody else does. I'm old. I'm 70 years old. And I had to quit working out because of my damage. I put on a little bit of weight. And I had to radically change my diet. And my doctor said, I want you to lose. You got to get down to 200 pounds. My fighting weight's 187. He said, get down to 200 pounds. It'll solve all your problems. And I said, yeah, I know. And what I have to do is I have to take every thought captive. Because I'll smell something. I say, I would love to eat that. But I won't. You see, I could become obese. I could be drawn to food. I could be drawn to power. I could be drawn to money. I could be drawn to another man, to a woman, to a horse. I don't know what I could be drawn to. I get drawn to those things. I am a man, period. I was created as a man. Some of you were created as a woman. That's your only choice. No matter what anyone says, God said in the beginning, I created mankind, male and female. I created mankind. And people say, well, God created me to be a something other, male or female. I'm sorry. No. We are battling. This is warfare. We're fighting against every high-minded, against the knowledge thing, exalts self against the knowledge of God. God said, I created, I don't know why I'm talking about this, but God said, I created men and women, male and female, ish, ishi in Hebrew. And then people say, well, no. He also created all these other things. No, he didn't. Take every thought that captive to the obedience of Messiah. Captive to the obedience of Messiah. One of the things that we do in this ministry, when you get to the board with the annual meeting, One of the rules here is I don't touch the finances. I don't touch the finances. I don't see the offering. I don't count the offering. I don't make a deposit. I don't write a check. I'm in too powerful position. It'd be easy for me to dip here, dip there, just a little bit. And it's not that I have any problem. It's just good business aspects. As someone's in a powerful position that I'm in this congregation, shouldn't get anywhere near the money. And I don't. I have all kind of other people that get near the money. That's their problem. Why? Because there's a war going on here. And from the aspect of running a business behind a ministry, it has to be above board in everything. There are checks and balances on everything. In your life, there has to be checks and balances and everything. In your family, there has to be checks and balances and everything. And what do you do if your spouse rebels, if your children rebel, if your grandchildren rebel? You know what? It's rebellion. It's part of not taking every thought captive, making it be into. And the world system exalts itself about God and says, okay, you were made that way. Unfortunately, according to the Bible, you were not. It's a choice you make. If you make that choice, it's a bad choice. It's a bad choice. People make bad choices all the time. I was talking to somebody earlier today about, I found out how to do it. Stop eating. If you like it, it's no good for you. There's the rule. You got to find something you're supposed to eat instead of what you like to eat. I know. I've been doing this for a long time. But you understand that? This is war. This is war. There's high-minded things that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. Isaiah 3:10. Isaiah 3:10, a time of separation from God. We are married but separated. Isaiah 3:10, say to the righteous, he will be well, eating the fruit of their deeds. Oi to the wicked, it will be bad for him, for dealing of his hands will be done to him. In other words, you know what? If you talk to the righteous, I could say to the righteous, you will be well. And that's truth. But oi to the wicked. There's no way to translate that other than oi the wicked. It will be bad for him, for the dealing of his hands will be done to him. In other words, his hands are doing things against the knowledge of God. And you sow to the wind, you reap the whirlwind. It's a biblical premise. And if you take that stand, you will offend the world. You know, we're very I won't pick on you, I'll pick on me. I normally render to Caesar Caesar, but if Caesar becomes anti-God, I will confront Caesar for his anti-God standards, and I will follow God. And if the world turns on me, Messiah said, yes, the world will turn on you. Why? Because we are at war. We are at war, and we've got to take a stance which is unpopular to the world because they come from high places with the knowledge that exalts itself against God. And you see it in the news. You see it in our schools. You see it in our government. It's Hosea 8:7, which said, they sow to the wind, they reap a whirlwind. It's a biblical premise. They sow to the wind, they reap a whirlwind. There is no mature grain that sprouts yields, yields no meal. Should it produce anything, strangers will swallow it up. If you sow to the wind, you reap the whirlwind. It's a biblical premise. And I'm sorry that happens to you. There's somebody that's not here today who's a member of this synagogue, but it's none of you because you wouldn't do that. Somebody who didn't make it in today, and I told her, you know what? You sow to the wind, you reap the whirlwind. I wish I could tell you all will be good. But you have sown to the wind and you're reaping the whirlwind. It's too late to do anything about it other turn to God and get things straight. You can't fix that. Once the whirlwind hits you is not the time to say, oh, sorry about that. That doesn't work. This is warfare. This is warfare. There's nothing wrong with saying sorry about that. Turning to God is not saying you're sorry. Turning to God is turning a direction away from your godlessness towards God. And it is absolutely a question of war. Down the next chapter, chapter 8. Put a shofar to your mouth. Like a vulture, he comes against the house of Adonai, for they overstep my covenant and transgress my Torah. Now, look at this picture. This is a Jewish story, so it's an allegory. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm saying it's Jewish, so it's allegorical. Put a shofar in your mouth. In other words, sound the alarm. Like a vulture, he comes against the house of Adonai, for they overstep my covenant. They transgress my Torah. What was the sin of Israel in the time of celebration, in time of separation? Excuse me. What do you say? What are you going to do with Israel? Blow a shofar, sound an alarm. Like a vulture, he comes against the house. They overstep my covenant and transgress my Torah. In other words, I'm going to define things from a worldly standards outside of the reality of God. Verse 2, will they cry out to me, my God, we, Israel, knew you? What are we going to say? Wait a minute. We, in case you don't know who it is, Israel, we knew you. We're your people. Sound familiar? Wait, we're your people. You can't take us into captivity. Your house is in the middle of Jerusalem. How could we lose Jerusalem? You live here. We're one of you. We're with you. How many believers say I'm a part of God's kingdom? Although my life doesn't look like it, I said a prayer once. And that gave me license. I could do anything I want, live any way I want, make any choice I want. After all, God made me this way. I say, no. We cry out, my God, we knew you. And here's the statement against Israel. Verse 3, Israel has rejected goodness. Israel has rejected goodness, and the adversary will pursue him. You can't reject godliness and goodness and not succumb to an open war from the adversary. He will come after you because you're opening a door. And you open the door because you don't take warfare seriously. 1 Corinthians, which is when that congregation came in out of the world but still had the world in them. And he says, look, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. In other words, it's a very immoral city, right? Corinth. The crossroads city of commerce for the Roman Empire. What's that crossroads city on the Mediterranean Sea? If you wanted to go across the Mediterranean Sea, you went through Corinth. If you want to go north and south, you go through Corinth. It was a worldly city. It says, look, bad company corrupts good morals. You know, it matters who I decide who I'm going to hang with and be one with. Be in the world. Don't be of the world. Well, if I behave like I'm totally separated, I won't have any friends out there. You know what? I don't need friends out there. I need God. And if being close to God costs me friends, and it does. How many people have left this congregation, left not because of COVID and not because they moved, left because they rebelled against, well, I don't like the way you're doing things. It's like, I don't care about the way I'm doing things. What is God doing? If your standards of love of God falls on me, you know, it is, you know, bad company corrupts good morals. I cannot hang around with really worldly people. One of the things Larry and Bob and I face out at Beit Yeshua, we have to hold those guys to high standards because, you know, these are all guys who have not been good all of their lives. And that's why they're so radically saved. Do you understand? They are radically saved. one of the most spiritual men on the compound were 10 consecutive life sentences. And I'm telling you, if you met him, he's the nicest guy, full of the Spirit, kind and gentle, and would do anything for you. And he's on the first of 10 consecutive life sentences. But if I walk in and I see him, I said, give me some cold water. Give me a this, give me a that. Give me anything I want. Get it. He's there for me. And in the morning, he gets in that area because he's a trustee, and he stays there until night when the guard escorts him back to where he sleeps. He's a good guy. But you know what? We never ask, so who did you slaughter? I don't want to know. We sometimes accidentally, because of what people say, it's like, oh, they start talking. I think, oh, that's my elder. You know, bad company corrupts you. You know, you got to be careful what you watch on television, listen to on the radio, read. You got to be careful. Modern television has this pact with the dark side. They have to insert ungodly concepts and show this is the normal world. And you know what? The normal world is lost because it exalts itself against the knowledge of God. And you can't hardly watch a modern show without it exalting itself against the knowledge of God. It's trash. It's trash. And you can't sit there and let that into your home. Verse 30, next verse 34. Come to your senses as you ought and stop sinning, for some have no knowledge of God. And I say this to the same. Look, come to your senses and stop sinning. If you continue sinning, you're losing the war. Come to your senses. Stop sinning. This is an analytical formula. If all A is B and all B is C, all A is C. It's all mathematical. I can put any statement into a mathematical formula. I studied that in college. For some have no knowledge of God. And I say that's to their shame. You know what the problem is? They have no knowledge of God, and they should be ashamed. They should be ashamed. Stop sinning. Titus, a Jewish letter, so it's going to paint a little picture for you. To the pure, all things are pure. To those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. Both their mind and conscience are defiled. To the pure, all things are pure. Now, I try to walk in the purity of the righteousness of God in Messiah. That doesn't mean I will, in the purity of God, lust after a woman, look at this, listen to that, watch this, bring this into my home. No. To the pure, all things are pure. You can't be pure and jump in the mud and think you won't get dirty. If you're going to be pure, everything is pure. But to those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. In other words, they could pray, they can do whatever, they can go to services, they can worship, they can do all these things. But everything is because both their mind and conscience are defiled. Actually, I was talking, I can throw Mitch under the bus. Because I remember I was talking to him. He talked about his friend, this guy who's married to another guy who's completely conservative and against anything that is not of God. It's like, how do you wrap your mind around that? See, he's completely conservative and against all this wrong in the world. He's against all the wrong, just like a lot of you are. He's against the wrong. He sees the world going down a slope. He hates liberalism. He hates socialism. He's an absolute conservative. He just happens to be married to another guy. It's like, where do you file that? Because it doesn't fit. And there's a problem. It's exalting itself against the knowledge of God. See, being on the right side of things does not make you pure. Being on the side of God makes you pure. And then everything else is defiled. If it's not of God, it is defiled. Romans 7. This is an analytical treatise of how you separate yourself from the world, how you separate yourself from the spiritual forces in high places, how you separate yourself from the evil. And Paul is writing a letter that's analytical. He's Jewish, but they're not. They are Romans, so it's analytical. He says, once I was alive apart from the Torah, but when the commandment came, sin came to life. He's talking about who he is as a Jew historically. He sees himself as historically a Jew. And see, we were Jews before we had the Torah. We got the Torah after hundreds of years after Abraham at Sinai. And he said, once I was alive apart from the Torah, because he was Jewish, because we are all in Abraham. It's a Jewish thought. We own our histories. Once I was alive apart from the Torah. But when the commandment came to life, sin came to life. In other words, I didn't know what all the rules were until he gave me the rules. And then I thought, oi, now I got a problem. So once he was alive, but when I read the Bible and saw God's standards, sin came to life, next verse, and I died. Because the commandment meant for life was found to cause death. Because the Torah explains why we are guilty and deserve death. Without the Torah, I didn't know I was guilty. I mean, what's the sin of a consenting adult? It depends on whether it exalts itself against the knowledge of God. And if it does, it is evil. And he said, I wouldn't know it was wrong to lust if he didn't say, do not lust. Oh, he didn't say that. Yeshua said that. Anyway, he said something. So I died. So the commandment, the Torah, which is meant for life, was found to cause death. Verse 11, the next verse, sin taking an opportunity through the commandment. In other words, God gave me these instructions, deceived me, and through it killed me. In other words, it revealed the deception in me. It's a verb form. The Torah reveals the deception in me, and then it killed me. Because I thought it was okay if it was a consenting adult. And then God said, yeah, if it's your wife and she's consenting, it's okay. I thought, oh, that's a problem. Next verse, verse 12. So then the Torah is holy, commandment is holy, righteous and good. See, the problem's not the Torah. It's not the Torah. And then it's a logical progression. So then, it's pretty clear the Torah is holy, the commandment is holy, righteous and good. Next verse, verse 13. Therefore, did that which is good become death to me? No. May it never be is the English translation. It means no. Rather, it was sin working death in me. See, the Torah became death to me. It wasn't the Torah that brought death. It's holy. What brought death was the sin in me that was revealed by the Torah. Through that which is good, so that sin might be shown to be sin. So that through the commandment, sin would become utterly sinful. See, I could talk to the guys about God did not create you to be a homosexual, period. There are no homosexuals. There are either men or women. In this case, they're only in this congregation, there are only men, period. Only men. There's no options out there. Now, today, the world will say, well, it depends on what you feel like. The world goes by feeling. The law goes by knowledge. The Torah goes by the instructions and will of God, which tears down every other thought. and it becomes utterly sinful. You see, it was sin working death in me. That which is good, the Torah, destroyed me because of the sin in me. And then the next thought in an analytical progression, for we know the Torah is spiritual, and the problem is I'm flesh. See, the problem is in my flesh. The problem is not in the Bible. The Bible is spiritual. The problem is in me. And it's not the Bible that's the problem in me. It's the sin in me that's the problem. Because my flesh is sold to sin. It's sold to sin. I've dealt with a lot of leaders who have dove into sin. And I'm sorry, but I've dealt with world leaders, spiritual leaders. I've dealt with them. I used to be a big shot in the movement. It was the worst thing that could happen to you if I showed up in your congregation unannounced. Because by the time I got there, you'd all been tried and found guilty. And I was there to lift your credentials, take your keys, and throw you out of your own congregation. I did that more than once. Nobody liked me coming into their congregation. I did that. Why? Because the people were sold to sin. Because these people, you know what? If I have an affair with somebody other than my wife, it wasn't a mistake. I didn't fall into that. I dove into that. I can't accidentally be with somebody other than my wife. This isn't in a dark Mideast night with everybody wearing a veil, and I don't know who she is, and I'm pretty drunk anyway. I can't fall into an adulterous relationship. I can't fall into a homosexual relationship. I can't fall into theft. I can't fall into anger. I can't fall into anything that is not of the kingdom of God. It is a choice I make. It is a conscious choice, and it may be stupidity. It may be flesh. It may be the enemy. But you know what? All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God because we succumb to the evil in us, because we're not used to the warfare. Is I'm going to take every thought captive, and I will not move on what I think. I will move on what the words of God say in the Bible. And then in a progressive concept, again, of analytical reason, the next verse is, I do not understand what I am doing. What I do not want to do, this I practice, but what I hate, this I do. I'm actually going to have to leave town before I go away in May, probably, because I'm going to go up and minister to a ministerial family. We'll just leave it to that. A family involved in Messianic ministry that I'm close to, and they really need some help. And when the smoke clears, when I'm done with my surgeries, I'm feeling better. When I could safely fly from state to state without having COVID restrictions on me and stuff, I'm going to go and deal with things. Now, I've been invited by them. Please come help us deal with these and they are in very, very, very difficult situation. It's a very difficult situation. And it's part of my apostolic calling. They know I can come and help. I will go. But here's the real problem. Sometimes I just don't understand what I'm doing. What I want to do, I practice. What I hate, that's what I do. And I've told you time and time again, I have always failed when I reacted to something. I have always failed when I reacted to something. And I was talking to my bride the other day. And I'm a really poor navigator. Anyone that's ever driven with me? Like at the Seder, they actually sent out a search party from the country club who knew who I was and guided me in, or I never would have found it. I'm that kind of person. But I needed to run an errand, and I needed to get it done. I needed to get it done immediately. I had to run out, jump my car, and go. But I slowed down and I listened to God. And if I slow down and listen to God, he talks to me, and I could do whatever he wants, and I flow. And here's my reality. This is me. I usually don't slow down enough to listen to God. He speaks to me all the time. He speaks to all of us all the time. We just don't always listen. And I, with my busy mind, I'm thinking about this and that, and dealing with this and that and this and that and that. And I got to do this because I got to get back to do this because this is on and this. And but I'll never do this unless I really just drive straight there and drive back. It's that simple. And so rather than just, I don't have the time, it's like, this is critical. I better listen to God. Now, you might think I do that all the time, but sometimes I just don't understand what I'm doing. What I want to do, this I practice. The things I hate, I don't do. See, I'd like to go somewhere, but while I'm going, I can make 20 phone calls. I have hands-free dialing in my car. And I could call 20 people while I'm driving somewhere because I'm always behind in my phone calls. And I will not react to anything asked me on Facebook. I don't care if it's my Facebook. I don't care if it's Beth Messiah's Facebook. I don't respond. I get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things that come in almost every day. It's like, no thanks. I'm not going to answer that. If you send me email, I might remember to respond to it. And people like Joni know that. She'll send me email. I see, I'll get right back to that. You see, I fill my mind with things that are busy. And if I fill my mind with things that are busy, I'm not filling my mind with God. And then I fail. And I'm thinking, why am I stupid enough to do that? I have to live like that. There's a struggle going on in me. And then he takes that, which is a struggle that's going on in me. I don't understand. What I want to do, I don't get done. What I don't want to do, that I do. And next verse is, so now it is longer, is that the next verse? Or did not jump? Go back to 16. Yeah, there is. But if I do what I do not want to, then I agree with the Torah, that it is good. If I do what I don't want to do, I'm not paying attention to the words of God. I'm distracted by the nothing. And that's why I do what I don't want to do. I'm distracted by the nothing. Therefore, I'm not doing what God tells me to do. And I'm agreeing with Torah that it is good. And now, here's the summation of that issue in me. Verse 17. So no longer I doing it, but sin dwelling in me. See, I think I want to do what God wants, but I don't do it. I do something else. That's the sin in me. It's not the Torah that's causing me a problem. It's the sin in me that's causing my problem. Which draws to the only conclusion you could draw, for I know that nothing good dwells in me. That is my flesh. There's the problem. It's in me. There's nothing good in me. For to will is present, to do good is not. In other words, I choose in my mind, I will do what is right. In my flesh, I won't necessarily. The will is present, to do good is not. Verse 19, for the good I want, I do not do. The evil that I do not want, this I practice. Because I'm living by the evil in me. This is where the true battle is. The true battle of warfare is in me. And if I don't recognize there's a war in me, I have lost the battle. And there's all kind of cheap theologies that says, I cannot be warring with demons within me. I am a minister of God. I am saved by grace. The Holy Spirit dwells in me. The enemy cannot. That is taught, and that's a cheap theology, because I'm telling you, I'm struggling because my soul is not complete. Here's a simple thought. My soul is not completely redeemed. I'm redeemed. My soul isn't. Right? When my back hurts, my back hurts. My flesh is not completely redeemed. My soul isn't completely redeemed. I cannot honestly say my thoughts never wander into. You ever? I do this. I realize I'm thinking about something. I'm embarrassed. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Why am I thinking about that? I don't want to think about that. But it crossed my mind anyway, and I have to take that thought captive. Whoa, 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 whoa! And then it's a step-by-step progression in mathematical format. If I do what I do not want, it's no longer I doing it. It's the sin dwelling in me. I have to see that. The true battle is in me. The true problem is there is sin in me, and I am falling short because of sin in me. You know, I'd love to blame all of you. I'm the rabbi. If you just did what I told you, then I would be holy. And you know what? No. My relationship with God, I'm either holy or I'm not holy. I'm either separated to God or not separated to God. And you have nothing to do with my relationship with God. I'm solely responsible for my relationship with God. You are solely responsible for your relationship with God. He's not saying, oh, this person's a member of Beth Messiah. They must be okay. So I find, verse 21, so I find this principle. The evil is present in me, the one who wants to do good. This is warfare, the evil that dwells in me. Verse 22, for if I delight in the Torah of God with respect to the inner man, but I see a different law in my body parts, battling against the law of my mind and bring me into bondage under the law of sin, which is in my body parts. Where does that leave me in the next verse? Miserable man. I'm miserable. Who will rescue me from this body of death? I'm really in bad shape because it sins me. Thanks be to God. It's through Messiah Yeshua our Lord. So then, with my mind, I will serve the Torah of God. With my flesh, I will serve the law of sin. In other words, I'm going to walk through this world in consistent and constant battle within me. And if I don't do the battle within me, I will not be an effective minister of God's grace to a lost world, because I will succumb always to the evil if I'm not battling against it, taking every thought captive. I'm changing where I'm going, Joni. I'm going to skip everything and go down to Judah. I have another 20 scriptures in Romans. I want to go this because this is something that I'm very aware of in the Hope Fest. Most of you did not see the significance of being engaged in the Hope Fest. Just a reality. I'm not saying that in judgment against you. I'm saying to you, from a worldly perspective, it was a difficult thing to be engaged in. If nothing else, it was cold. And if you're watching online, it was cold for Floridians. It was cold. It was long hours. If you wanted to be engaged, it was long hours. And most of the people involved served in more than one capacity. They served in, I don't know anyone that served in just one capacity. Some only served in 2 capacities. Many served in 3 capacities, moving around, serving the needs of the people. And at the end, they called up all the pastors that were there, and I think there was 5. Anyone paying attention? Wasn't there about 5, including me? 7? Maybe 7. Which for a big thing, there should have been more than that, in my opinion. And I didn't know some of the people were up there. I don't know what they did. But there were 7 pastors. And everybody knew that the success of that fest came because we were in there plowing the ground praying. And there are a lot of theologies that say we should just call down spiritual forces over Pride Park and tear them down. The warfare, the witchcraft, the anger, the control. Tear down these strongholds because it's biblical. The little letter to Judah. It's called Jude. I don't know why it's called Jude. There are no Jude. There's no Jews. There's no Judas. They're all Judah. They have to change everybody's name so you know who they are. And it's talking about people who engage in warfare, except they're being stupid about it because it's not biblically sound. And I want you to see this. You can get involved in warfare that is not biblically sound, and you're going to lose. You're going to lose if you don't engage in warfare the way God told you to engage in warfare. It says these people slander whatever they do not understand instinctively, like animals without reason. By these things they are destroyed. These are people who are engaging in spiritual warfare. These are people directly engaging in spiritual warfare. And they say they're slandering what things they don't begin to understand, what they don't understand instinctively, like animals without reason. By these things they are destroyed. They're doing warfare, but they're not doing it biblically. Next verse. Not everyone who says, I didn't know where I was going. Oh, did I give you the rest of Judah? That's my fault. Go back to Judah. I'm going to do 3 through 10. Oh, you thought it was 3:10. Sorry about that. I didn't put chapter 1 verses. There's no chapters. I meant verses 3 to 10. So I started 3, verse 3, which is not up there. I will end in 10. I didn't even see that's where it was. Loved ones, though very eager to write you about our common salvation. It's a Jewish letter. Loved ones, though very eager to write you about our common salvation, I felt it necessary to write you, urging you to continue to contend for the faith. I want to urge you, contend for the faith. That was what's handed down to you by the kedoshim, the separated ones. English Bible doesn't call them saints, which I don't know what that means, but the separated ones, the holy ones. I'd like to just talk about our common salvation, but you have to contend for the faith. And the next verse, verse 4, for certain people have secretly slipped in. Those who from long ago have been marked out for this judgment, they are ungodly people who pervert the grace of our God into indecency and deny our Master and Lord Yeshua Messiah. There are people who come into the believing body of Messiah, which is thankfully a lot bigger than this congregation, but they are plants from the enemy. And he has sent people in here that are plants from the enemy. None of you here today, but other people. They secretly say, who have been long given marked for judgment. They're ungodly people who pervert the grace of our God. Verse 5, now I wish to remind you. I want to remind you about this warfare. You've got to contend for your faith. That you've come to know all things. You're becoming aware of all things that the Lord once having saved the people out of the land of Egypt afterward destroyed those who did not believe. It's a Jewish letter. I want you to remember you're grasping all things. Remember the people that God redeemed out of Egypt afterward destroyed them all. You're not in because God redeemed you. The people that God redeemed out of Egypt weren't in because they were redeemed. He brought them out of Egypt and then destroyed them, right? It's a picture. It's an allegory. It's true, but it's an allegory. Verse 6. And the angels who did not keep their own position of authority but deserted their proper place, he kept in everlasting shackles under the gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. This is the fall of the battle of angels in the heavens. So he's talking about those that were redeemed out of Egypt, God later destroyed. And the angels who did not keep their own position of authority, but deserted their proper place He has kept in everlasting shackles and gloomy darkness till the judgment of the great day. And it goes on, drawing the picture in the next verse, in the same way as these angels, Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them had given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after a different sort of flesh, are displayed as an example, suffering the punishment of eternal fire. In other words, I told you what happened in these places. Have you ever been to how many of you have been to the Dead Sea in the surrounding areas? The most of the people have been here. When Abraham and Lot went and looked down on that, Lot said, I want that because that's the most lush green area I have ever seen. And if you go down there today, it's like, I don't know what he saw. And according to Israeli history, it looks like that because God rained down fire and brimstone on that area. And it's a stark, barren desert. But before, when Abraham and Lot was there, it was the most lush place in the promised land. And so the same way God dealt with these angels, those cities are displayed as an example of suffering punishment. In other words, these were people who gave themselves over to sexual immorality. It's wrong, and they knew it was wrong. And it goes on to talk about the people he's talking about engaged in spiritual warfare in the verse 8. Yet the same way these people also by their visionary dreaming defile the flesh, reject God's mercy, and defame glorious beings. In other words, when Daniel was in captivity, he didn't pull down the very powerful God that was over Babylonian captivity. He prayed, and even an archangel couldn't get through that until God sent a second archangel. Never occurred to him, I guess, to pull down the powers. Yet there are portions of Christianity that think God told them to pull down the powers over here and there and somewhere else. And the reality is, I can't even pull down the powers inside of me. And they defame glorious beings. We're going into warfare where we have not been invited to go into warfare. And you don't want to go into warfare when you have not been sent into the warfare. Verse 9. And it explained when Michael the archangel, Michael the archangel, disputed about the devil, was arguing about the body of Moses, he did not dare render a judgment against him for slander, but said, may the Lord rebuke you. In other words, it's talking about a part of our history that's not in the Bible except for here. Moses died. Nobody knows he's buried. And it said there was this argument. There was this argument about the body of Moses. And he was arguing with the devil. And he did not rebuke the devil. He said, the Lord rebuke you, because he didn't go beyond the scope of his authority. And we have to be careful. Yes, warfare, but not beyond the scope of your authority. And then I read verse 10. Because of the way I sent it to Joni, it was my mistake. These people slander what they do not understand. Whatever they don't understand, instinctively like animals without reason. By these things they are destroyed. You are called to warfare. Don't do it haphazardly. Pride Park was impacted by the Hope Fest, the Bradenton Hope Fest. If you turn the corner, you're there. They parked in this lot. They parked in the lot next door, and it was right across the street in the school's baseball field. It impacted that. And the people say we were able to do this because there was a ministry that walked through this area and changed the atmosphere. Nobody got there and pulled down the spiritual authority over Pride Park. Nobody engaged in that thought you could come in there and join in unison and said, we tear down the powerful heavenly authorities over this park. Never occurred to anybody to do that, but I'm telling you, we are engaged in warfare. And most of the warfare is inside of me. Most of the warfare is in me. I am struggling. And one of the things that people don't like to talk about is the next verse, which I gave you, which is Matthew, I think. What's the next verse? Yeah, Matthew 7:21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Just because you call Yeshua Lord doesn't get you into the kingdom. Just because you call Yeshua Lord, just because you call Jesus Lord, God Lord, just because you say Lord, that doesn't get kingdom. And further than that, the next verse, many will say, many. Not a few, not a minority. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name, drive out demons in your name, perform many miracles in your name? Didn't we have flashy ministries? Didn't we do all kind of good things for you? And the response in the next verse, I would declare to them, I never knew you. Get away from me, you workers of lawlessness. How does that work? I won't mention any names because not everybody knows what happens. There was a move of God centered on a man, because a lot of moves of God center on a man. People thronged because anytime there's a move of God that excites people, they flow into that. And the leader got into sin, but stayed in ministry, and God still moved. Why? Because the man wasn't doing it. God was doing it, and the people had faith in God doing something. Therefore, God did something. All these Messianic leaders, I went into their usually I didn't do it in front of their congregation. I went to where they live. I knocked on the door. It said, do you have your credentials here? Give them to me. Do you have the keys to your building? Give them to me. You're not to go back there anymore. I had that kind of authority. I said, made people, and it's like, you know what? They did great ministries, and the people in the congregation didn't know it. I went into one congregation, which is still thriving. They actually grew, and they had a world-class leader. And I went and said, you're out, never go back. And it was High Holy Days. Some of you remember when I disappeared during High Holy Days, it was never good. And so I went. I think it was Rosh Hashanah. And I showed up. Well, everybody knows me. It's not like who are you? It's like, why is Rabbi Judah here instead of our rabbi? And I just did the service. And it was a Saturday morning service, as I recall. And I said, I know a lot of you are wondering why I am here. You need to know why I'm here, because there's a serious reason why I'm here. And if you are a member of this congregation, I want everybody to leave, come back in 2 hours, and I'll tell you why I am here, and you need to know, because I didn't know who was a member. And they came back in. And I said, I'm here because your rabbi is gone, and he's not coming back. And it's like, and I said, here's why your rabbi is gone. He dove into sin. He is out, and he ain't coming back. I'll talk to your board of directors. We'll see what your future is. And somebody raise their hand and say, well, I'm sleeping with somebody else, and I'm the cantor. Is that a problem? I said, it's not a problem. Leave. But I handle Yom Kippur. I said, not here, you don't. Leave. Go. But you know, that congregation grew until they found somebody else to take their place. They actually had to get another building. They had a good board of directors. It was a great, thriving congregation. It didn't stand on what the leaders did. It stand on what God was doing. There is a warfare going on. A lot of people involved in a lot of ministry are not a part of the kingdom of God. It's just the people are responding to God. They may make the mistake of following a man, but they know, ultimately, if you follow me, you go to Israel with me in particular, you'll see my humanity. Live with me on a bus for a couple of weeks. And a lot of you have done that. You know, it kind of gets real. Especially, was the last one when everyone got the Jerusalem virus, was that the last time we were there? 2 times ago. The Jerusalem virus hit with a vengeance. Everybody got sick. Everybody got sick. I and several others ended up with pneumonia. And it was a really, really rough time. But there you find out I'm real. I'm real. I'm just a guy. If you see God's anointing in me, give God the glory. Don't give me the glory. I just show up. I've never performed a miracle. I've seen miracles, and sometimes God lets me be there. Often he doesn't. Don't follow any man. Somebody may look good, sound good, doesn't mean anything. We were talking, how could people read the Bible and keep living the way they live? And I don't have to look at the church. I have to look at the Messianic congregation. How can you read the Bible and live the way you live? And say, well, I have special circumstances and God understands. No, he doesn't. Get away from me. You called me Lord, you did ministry. I never knew you. We are in God. Oh, boy, I'm over. But I want to leave you with a word of hope. I want to read you with a word of hope because you've got to accept the warfare that's in you. Go to the Revelation. I have something. He who has an ear, let him hear what the rock is saying to Messiah's community. To one who overcomes, I will grant the right to eat from the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. You see, we are called to be overcomers. And my true battle in overcoming is not the world. My true battle in overcoming is in me. And a lot of you understand, if you get here every week, it's because you overcome and get here. Because if we only came when we felt like it, we would be thinner than we are now. Because a lot of people don't come when they don't feel like it. And I got to tell you, when I got up this morning, I didn't feel like it. I said, I got a meeting and get out the Beit Yeshua. I don't feel like that either. But, you know, the thing I want to do doesn't matter. It's what God wants to do. You can win the warfare if you fight it according to the biblical mandate. And unless you defeat the enemy in you, you cannot defeat the enemy out there. Be blessed, everybody. Shabbat shalom. I pray God's blessing upon you. Enjoy Oneg. If you want to become a member and you're not yet a member, you want to explore, just explore covenant membership, come right up to that room over there, and I'll turn on the air conditioner, which I forgot to do.